Hey guys, and welcome to another week of the Pagnotta Take on Sports. We continue with our college football previews for this year, and we did the ACC last week, so this week we're going to move on to the American Conference. Very, very exciting. And once again, guys, I have my great friend with me again, Josh Marlow. He's going to be here for at least another week. We'll see how long he keeps coming back on the show here. So I guess I'm assuming you guys liked him, so we'll keep him on here. So we start with the American. This is the first year that the American is actually going to have a conference championship. The American's only been in existence for a couple of years now, and once Louisville moved out, it seemed like this conference is pretty much hitting the toilet. I mean, this is not an interesting conference in terms of national perspective. I mean, there's some teams that could have a little bit of an effect on the national picture, but I don't really think anyone's going to be up there competing for a title or anything like that. We start with the American East. They'll have the East and the West. Really, this conference is really all over the place throughout the United States. I think as far as they go is Texas, but we start with the East. We'll go with UConn. That's who I have as the worst team in the East. I have them going 2-10, 1-7 in conference. Bob Diaco, I think he's a good coach. He's one of those guys that needs some time. Of course, a great defensive coordinator at Notre Dame for many years, and I thought they made the right decision going after him. But 2-10 his first year. I don't see it getting much better this year. He doesn't really have anything big coming back. No superstars. The quarterback position is an absolute disaster. I mean, they've had no one for years in that program. And again, this year they really have nothing. The running back position's usually loaded. This year their best running back coming back is a guy named Ron Johnson, a sophomore who ran for 429 yards last year. They're not really they don't have any passing attack without the quarterback. They have no wide receivers that are really big named. They definitely need someone to step up, but I mean, from looking at it, it doesn't seem like their offense has anything going for them. Defensively, again, not a whole lot's there. They do return 7 starters, so that's somewhat of a positive. The linebacking position, they return 2 guys, Marquise Van and Graham Stewart, who are decent. Up front, they return 2 pass rushers, and Julian Campany, who's he's not too bad, and Keaton Adiyami. I really hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Once again, a decent pass rusher, no one great. The secondary, they do return 3 of the 4 starters, so that's something good, the experience there. Kicking game, up and down, not really that great. So, I expect really a bad year again up there in Stores. I don't expect they're going to be anything great. They're not going to get back to their heyday. But Diaco, I think, needs at least a chance, and he needs to get some talent in there that's actually going to do something. So, what do you think about the Connecticut Huskies?
Well, they lost their best player that was on that roster in the NFL, Byron Jones, as the Dallas Cowboy. So the defense the defense is going to be good because they're defensive minded, but when your offense is so inept, I guess, and they can't move the football, can't sustain drives, a good defense is going to look bad statistically, and that's going to be the case again this year. I think they got a very good coach who had a good mentor coming from Notre Dame. But there's going to be a lot they got to do to get the program back to where Randy Edsall had it before he left. They got to upgrade facilities. Connecticut is a basketball school, so it's hard to recruit anyway, but when there's nothing there in Stores, I mean, no one wants to go live and where it's going to be snowing 4 months out of the year. So he's got a lot of challenges. You got to find a quarterback and an offensive identity, and to start making movement out of the bottom of the American and become a contender as they progress, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I like Diaco as a coach. I don't think this is the job that he's going to keep for a while. He's probably going to be fired. He'll find somewhere else to go and have some success. Because I think he is a good coach, but I think he was dealt probably one of the worst hands in the nation.
Yeah, because
there's no talent there. Like you said, it's basketball. I mean, they're bringing in their top recruits are 3 stars or worse. They're not anything great. So, I mean, and we remember the days where they were up there, competing at the top of the, near the top of the nation. They were up there shocking people. So,
yeah.
It's just horrible to see them down at the bottom. From there, we move on to South Florida. This is another team that was once again, at a time they were one of the great teams. One of those teams that was shocking people. They have a good coach. I like their coach, Willie Taggart, and they thought he was going to be the solution there. But he's been there 5 years. He's 16 games under 500, so he's not achieving the way they would like, and there's really no excuse. I mean, you're playing in the American. That's a weak conference. You should be winning ball games, pretty easy in that conference if you're as good as a coach as you think. They've got some guys. Marlon Mack, he ran for over 1,000 yards last year, 9 touchdowns. He's their best player. I mean, the dude I think is he's a first team all American.
Yeah.
American Conference, technically. That's pretty clever by them, I guess. Quarterback, they have a transfer in Stephen Bench from Penn State, but this is how bad they are. They're not even projecting him to be the starter. So they can't seem to work talent into that program. Defense, they only return 3 starters from last year. So that's definitely not a positive to go off of there. But they were always a decent defensive team. But once again, ever since they've moved into the American Conference, they've seemed to take a downturn. So from looking at it, I don't see anything great for them. Their schedule again. They play at Florida State, at Miami. So at a conference, it's not like they don't play anybody, but I don't think they stand a chance of really beating anyone. I have them 3-9 and 2-6 in the conference. What's your take on South Florida?
Well, I believe, are they not changing to an air raid offense? I believe they're trying to find something.
It says have changed to an up-tempo, heavy spread principle. So, not an air raid, but basically, I think they're going to try to run kind of what we run in Chapel Hill, kind of like up-tempo, more pass-based, but up-tempo. That's
the way I describe it. They're getting along, or they're moving into the newer world of college football, which is all about tempo and space, and that's going to help, especially in a weaker conference where they may be limited with athletes, but if they scheme right, they can scheme their way to a bowl game. They've got a good coach. They've got somewhat, they've got a running game. You've got to be able to run the football to win in any league at any stage of football. So they've got some pieces there. Problem is like, how long are they going to give the coach? He's in his 5th or 6th year, and he has
6 years.
He's got a terrible record. Granted, Skip Holtz didn't leave him with a lot, but they've taken a step back instead of step forwards. It'd be good to see them become relative. They do play Miami every year just about, so they're willing to play people, but they've got to get some better recruiting, find an identity offensively. The defense has been solid for the most part, and hopefully they can move upward in the American and become a bowl-like team.
Yeah, my thing is, again, when they were having success, they were quarterback-laden. You had Matt Grothe, you had B.J. Daniels.
Yes.
So they don't have that great quarterback there, and I think that's what you need. Now their running back, Marlon Mack's a good player, but the problem is you can't just rely on just running the football. But they definitely need to get it going. They're in a weaker conference, and if they want Taggart to stick around, this is the time to get him going. So from there we move on. One of the programs that was really in the dumps for the longest time, and was revitalized by 2 really great coaches in Al Golden and then Steve Adazio. Now a little bit of a different look. Matt Raul has come in. I know he was an offensive line coach with the Giants in the NFL before he came there. He's 8-16 in 2 years, so he's not great. Last year he went 6-6 after their first year, which was pretty much a disaster, 2-10. So, he definitely took a step in the right direction. There is talent here. This is a little bit different than the last year we've talked about, where it's pretty much just been a disaster. There's no one there. There's no hope. Here, you've got a talented quarterback, I think, in P.J. Walker. If he could cut down on the turnovers, he would actually be, have a chance to lead them somewhere. Running game, again, they're decent but not great. But there's, they should be able to find someone that should step up there. Wide receivers, they return a couple of good players. But defensively is where they are loaded. They've got some really great players. They return 10 starters to begin with, so they only have one spot they have to fill on that defense, which is nuts. Tyler Matakevich, he's one of the best linebackers in the entire country. He's a monster. He's actually in the running to be an All-American at a Temple. Then they have a great defensive tackle in Matt Iondis, I think is how you pronounce his name. He's another great player. Praise Martin Ogioki, I think is how that's probably wrong, but I'm trying here. He plays defensive end. They return all their starters up front. They return everyone in the secondary. So they've got a chance. That defense should be pretty good under defense coordinator Phil Snow, who's a pretty good defensive coordinator. So, looking at it, they have the pieces in place to be that team that could get up to what Temple was with that 8-4, 9-3 type range up there. But just, looking at the schedule, they do draw some tough games. Of course, they always start out with Penn State, but games like at Cincinnati, they play on the road in games like that. They play at East Carolina. They play Notre Dame at a conference, I know. So they don't really draw the greatest schedule. I have them going 6-6, 4-4 in conference. I think they're going to be a good team, but I think they're still about a year or two away from competing in the American Conference. So what do you think about the Owls?
Well, the best thing that they got going for them compared to the other two teams is they got a quarterback.
They do.
They've got an offensive identity, and they return all but one starter off their defense. So they got a lot of things going well for them. I think the coach has done good. They regressed after losing the previous coach, but that was kind of expected.
Yeah. You don't just lose Adagio and keep going.
And Temple, granted, a lot of these games they play out of conference are going to be, quote, money games to help fund their program.
That's true.
At least they don't mind playing Penn State.
That's a rivalry. They play them every year.
Or Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's...
I think they could be the team that makes the leap because they return the defense. They've got a quarterback. So they could be the team that takes that next step and pushes to 7-8 wins. I'm not saying they're going to tend to win the division, but they're definitely on the trend up, and that's good for that program as they progress in the American.
Well, the top four in the American East, really, when you look at it, there's no one that's really bad. Like, all of them stand a chance to win that.
Yeah.
There's no one that's really... There's no one great. There's no one real bad up at the top there. So, they'll be in it, I think. Number 3 in the American East, we move on to East Carolina. Now, of course, the storyline with East Carolina is not about this year. It's about last year and all the players that have left. They lost their quarterback, Shane Carden, who was the best in program history. They lost their best wide receiver in program history and pretty much in Conference USA and American history in Justin Hardy. He just put up just unbelievable numbers while there. This year it's a little bit of a different feel at East Carolina. There's more of a feel that the focus needs to be on defense because they do return some stars there as opposed to offense where they've been used to returning stars. But if we turn back to the offense, as Carolina fans, we know they destroyed us last year, so we actually got to see some of these backup kids like Kurt Benkert, their starting quarterback for this year. He was actually pretty good, so I think he's gonna be able to show up, and I think he'll be good enough to where he'll keep them competitive. They do have some wide receivers that are returning in Isaiah Jones and Davin Grayson, but behind them there's not a whole lot of depth, not a lot of guys that were big last year. Running back, they've always had depth there usually, but again this year they don't return a starter there, so that's going to be tough to see them really having a great running game. But that's not even really their style. Tight end, they return Bryce Williams, who's a pretty good tight end. But defense, as we said, they moved to the defense. Now, they lost the big man in the middle, Terry Williams, 354-pound defensive tackle. It's a big man. That's hard to lose in the middle. But you have Terrell Stanley returning from injury at the defensive end position, so he's going to get back into his starting role. I believe they did have a good transfer in Kahardri Hooker. That was one of the ones that they said was going to be a really good guy coming in, but he's going to be stuck behind a starter in Jonathan White from last year. But linebackers where they're stacked. They got Monteese Overton, who's a really good linebacker, and Zeke Bigger in the middle, who had 140 tackles last year. You can't just pass that off. Secondary-wise, they do return 2 starters, but one of them isn't even projected to be a starter this year. So the only one that will start will be Josh Hawkins. Again, behind them, not a whole lot of experience. So, that's an area maybe of a little concern there. In the American, there are some teams that do have some good passing games. And then when you move on to special teams, they've got a good kicker in Davis Plowman, a transfer from Texas A&M. And then they have Worth Gregory, who was a great punter last year. Again, not a team that I see really being competitive. I have them at 6-6, 5-3 in conference. At a conference, they always play great teams at a conference, and it's no different this year. They play Virginia Tech again. They play at Florida. And then they play at BYU, which half the conference is playing at BYU. So, I don't know what's going on with that. But, looking at it again in conference, they do end up drawing a lot of the tough teams at home, though. So that's the good thing for them. But what's your take on the people from Greenville?
Well, they've lost 3 things. They lost their quarterback, their receiver, but I think the most important one was their offensive coordinator, Lincoln Riley.
Who was one of the best in the country.
Who's going to Norman.
Yeah.
And I think in 3 years he'll be having a head coaching job. And I think that's really gonna affect them, because I thought he did a very good job for bringing Shane Carden along, and evolving that offense to fit around him. They're always going to be pass first. That's who they are.
Oh yeah.
But they were able to run the ball successfully last year. They ran on us. They ran on a good number of teams. I think they'll be better than 6-6 just because they play with that constant chip on their shoulder. They'll get up to play Virginia Tech. I mean, they'll get up and play anybody. It's a good, solid program. Ruffin McNeil's done a great job there at his alma mater. So I'm glad that Carolina doesn't have to play them this year. And
get a 2-year break from them, and then we play them again. So
they're really fun to watch. As long as their defense can hold up, they should be a bowl team and be there late in the season, maybe to win the division. So
yeah, I mean you're right. I mean, losing the offensive coordinator Lincoln Riley, who I think is one of the most underrated in the country. I think he's gonna really make a difference out there in Norman. But yeah, losing him is not going to be easy. I think McNeil is good enough is a good enough coach that he's going to keep them up there and competitive. So they'll be in it, and the conference is weak, so they get lucky there as well. Then second in the American East, this is a tiebreaker. They actually lose out. I think it's Central Florida. Again, this is another. They have talent. Justin Hallman returns, good quarterback, but not the Blake Bortles style. I think he turned it over a little too much with 14 interceptions last year. He's got to cut down on that if he hopes to keep them up in there and competitive. The running back position, they do have their starter back in William Stanback, but wide receiver, they bring back nobody. So they have to find new people all over in the wide receiver position. One of their expected starters is a former quarterback recruit, so that's showing you how weak they are at that position. Offensive line, they do return 4 starters, so that's a good thing there, and they have a very talented offensive line. Defense, again, not a whole lot returning, only 4 starters returning. The good news is up front they do return 3 starters, and they're 3 pretty good ones in Luke Adams, Thomas Niles, and Demetrius Anderson. They also have Jameis Pittman, who's a good player that's going to slide in there as well. So there is some talent here. Linebacker, they only return 1 starter in Shaquan Burkett, and then secondary they return nobody. So it's a whole new group there. So George O'Leary's got his work cut out for him. But George O'Leary, I mean, we know from watching him, in his years at Central Florida, he's one of the best. I think he's one of the most underrated coaches in the country. I think George O'Leary's done just a great job with what he's had there. And now he's brought them into, he's moved them up into a higher conference than they were in, and he has them competitive. And I think they're going to be good, but I just don't see enough there for them to win the conference. I think they lose that tiebreaker because it is in Cincinnati. So that's the only reason they'll end up losing out. But
yeah, and you're looking at the depth chart, defensively they look young. Only, 4 starters back, maybe?
4 starters back.
The good thing is
freshmen.
They do have a returning starting quarterback, and that goes a long way. They should be a solid 7, 8-win, 9-win football team. Playing at Cincinnati is going to be tough. But George O'Leary's a good coach. They'll be competitive with anyone they play.
Exactly.
That's a given. But
yeah, I mean, looking, they'll make a bowl game, no doubt. But at a conference, they do play good teams. I mean, they play at Stanford, which they could win that game just because Stanford can't score the football. And then they play at South Carolina, but this isn't going to be like a couple of years ago where we were watching them nearly upset South Carolina.
Yeah,
it's just not that feel there. I mean, once you don't just lose a guy like Blake Bortles and move on. And I'm not saying Hallman's not a good quarterback. I just don't think he's quite up to the level of what Bortles was.
Yeah. And
then from there we move on. Cincinnati will win the American East Conference. Lot of talent here again. Tommy Tuberville, of course, their coach. He's seen it all. He's been around a long time, 19 years coaching. So, I mean, he comes in. He's made that program. He's kept it up where it was. It's not going to be up near the Brian Kelly, where they were up when Brian Kelly was there. But I don't think anyone really expected that. And if you did, you have unrealistic expectations. Quarterback, they have probably one of the better ones in the country if he can live up to what he was expected to be in Gunnar Kiel. We all remember the drama with him transferring from Notre Dame to LSU, then leaving LSU to go to Cincy, or I don't even know. I think he went to 3 or 4 other teams before he came there. He's been all over. But, running back, they need to find a starter there. They have a couple of guys. Their leading rusher from last year is predicted to be their 3rd running back, so that's, that shows right there they do have some talent, but they just have to figure it out. Wide receiver, they return all 4 of their starting wide receivers because they run a spread. The best one is Shaq Washington. He's a good player, definitely. We've seen him. He can run. They used to run a little bit of wildcat quarterback with him, but I'm pretty sure they moved on from that now with Keel in there. So talent is definitely there on the offensive side of the ball. They have a couple of guys returning up front as well. They have 3 guys returning on their offensive line. Defensively, they don't return a whole lot. The front 4, they only return 1 player, Silverberry Muhan. Other than him, it's a whole new group up front, and a lot of those guys look young. Linebacker, there's not a whole lot there either that's returning. They only return 1 starter there in Leviticus Payne, but they do have some more experience that's going to step up in that position. But secondary, they do return 3 of their 4 starters, all of which are pretty talented. So they have a chance to be competitive. I think they'll win the American East, if not just for a lack of no one else really stepping up to win that part of the conference. But at a conference, I mean, they play some decent teams. They do play Miami and at BYU. But other than that, I mean, their schedule really sets up for them to have some success and at least be competitive, maybe get to 9 wins if they're lucky about having winning 8.
Yeah. The thing about Tommy Tuberville teams is they're going to run the football. They're naturally physical. Because he comes from an SEC background. He's done a good job. He's got a quarterback who, if he decides to stay in school, his talent alone gives them a fighting chance with the coaching of Tuberville. Their defense is normally pretty good. They're not great, but they're physical. They've got depth at the running back position that you noted too, which is key. So, if they didn't win that division, I consider it to be a very big disappointment. That team, because of the schedule, could win nine games, 10 with a bowl game or conference championship victory. So it's looking bright in Cincinnati as they phase on.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be competitive. I mean, like I said, lack of any other teams being competitive just helped them win that. So from there we move on. So now we're on to the American West Conference. A lot of these, this is more Conference USA field. A lot of these are former Conference USA teams. And Navy is actually going to be in here, and we'll discuss those as we go along. But we start at the bottom where I have the Tulsa Golden Hurricane. Last year was a pretty bad year for them. They ended up firing their longtime coach, Bill Blankenship, so he's gone, and a new group comes in Tulsa. Phil Montgomery, the offensive coordinator from Baylor, comes in there, and I actually love the hire. I think it's going to be, I think it could be a good experiment. But again, year one, it's not going to be. I don't think it's going to be anything superstar-like out there. I don't think they're going to be, putting up, American West Championship and beating all these, maybe going into Oklahoma and winning a football game. But, looking at I mean, they do return a decent amount of players, 13 in total. Offensively, you start out, they got their quarterback back in Dane Evans. That's a good player, but he's being challenged from behind by a true freshman in Chad President, so he's got to watch out for that. He wasn't really great last year. He did throw 23 touchdowns, but I think that was a product of the offensive style that they run because he did throw 17 interceptions as well. Running back, there's no one that's a real star that's back. Zach Langer was their leading rusher, and he's not even projected to be anywhere close to the top of the depth chart, so don't really get that. Wide receiver, they do have some talent there with Kieris Garrett, I think is how you pronounce his name, Kevion Lewis, and Josh Atkinson. All three of those are returning starters. And behind them, there's not a whole lot of depth, though, so they have to be able to stay healthy. There are a lot of true freshmen and sophomores behind them. So you look also on their offensive line. They do return 4 starters up front, so that is a very good sign for them. Defensively, again, there is some talent. Derek Alexander is their best player defensively. He could have a good year, and they're hoping he has a good year. They also return Jerry. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that last name. He wears number 70, if anyone's wondering. They return him, so they're going to have a chance to at least rush the passer. Linebacker, they return 2 starters, and they only return 1 in the secondary. Again, not a whole lot of talent there. And this is a team that have went from, again, another one of those teams in the American Conference that was competitive, that was good under guys like G.J. Kinney when they had him a quarterback. And, towards the end of the Blankenship era, it just faded away. And now pretty much Montgomery's coming in there with nothing to build off of. So what do you think about the Tulsa Golden Hurricane?
Well, they're kind of, in a way, like how Baylor was before he got to Baylor. They were a failing program, and he has the chance to build them. You imagine that they're going to put up some points just because the way that system works.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to score 30, 35 points, probably in their sleep. The problem is can the defense hold up? The talent level is not where it's going to need to be, even though they're in the American. And the American is kind of like half of the Conference USA. They got to up the talent level. But, I think it could very well be in 2-3 years they could be at the top of the West.
Oh, yeah.
With the coaching staff, with the philosophy, and get back to where they were, because, they were, a few years ago, they were kind of like that boys team that could have made a BCS run. And
yeah,
so
they had some good years out there.
So, it'd be good to see that program get back at where it was. They've got a good fan base. They're strong, faithful. And I think in 2-3 years they'll be good again, and they'll be looking for a new coach because probably their head coach will probably be gone by then. So
yeah,
there's work to be done, but I think it could be a very quick fix, and they could be competing and be a bowl team probably by year 2. So
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, you said scoring-wise, they should score up near 35. They only scored 24.7 a game last year, which was 91st nationally. But that wasn't the problem. They let up 39.3 a game. You got to fix that, especially in the conference that you're in. I mean, there's talent there, but not that much talent. But the thing that the recruiting actually worked out well, I think, by getting Montgomery. They took away one of Baylor's biggest recruits in President. They brought him over. So that's a good sign. And, again, this is another job where you've got to give him some time. If you give him some time, they will be good enough. He won't be there for long, but they'll be good enough to where, they'll be able to stick around for a couple of years. From there, we move on to number 5. It is Tulane. They had a couple of good years. They kept their coach surprisingly. I'm surprised they've kept Curtis Johnson, but it is, he's been there 3 years. Year 4 is the year I think a lot of people have him on the hot seat. In the American, again, he should be competitive because these are not much different from the Conference USA, so we've seen these teams before. Now, there is talent here. Tanner Lee is a good quarterback who ended up having to take over because they thought they brought in Nick Montana, Joe Montana's son. They thought he might have been able to turn around, get some sort of superstar in there, and that was a disaster. So Lee came in. He played pretty well last year, but again, while playing well, he has a touchdown to interception ratio of 12 to 14. You can't have that. Definitely have to cut down on those. Sherman Beatty is a good running back, but he only ran for 688 yards and 3 touchdowns on 121 carries. So he really got going late in the year. So hopefully they'll use him more. I think he has sensational talent. He's a second-team All-American Conference player in my mind. Looking at the wide receiver position, pretty weak. Offensive line, they returned 4 starters. So there is something there, but again, they're going to have to, they definitely have to take a step in the right direction from last year, in which they were 121st in the nation in scoring. They only scored 16 points a game. I mean, for the Tar Heels, we scored that in a couple of minutes in certain games. So I mean, looking at the defense, there's some talent there. Their numbers weren't too bad last year. So there's something to build on. Up front, they returned 3 starters. That's always good. Linebacker, they returned all 3 of their. They run a 4-2-5. So they returned both their linebackers. One of them isn't even projected to start. They have a kid that's apparently a little bit better than him, and so they might be good at that position. Corner, they have a really talented player in Perry Nicholson. He's only a sophomore. Last year, he had 6 interceptions, and he didn't have many of them until late in the year, so that's a good sign for them. At that position, they returned one of their starting safeties, but again, they're going to have to find a whole group of replacements, and there is no depth at that position. So Tulane, once again, they're kind of in the shadow, especially in Louisiana, in New Orleans, of LSU and Louisiana Lafayette, some of these more built programs. So, I think they could have some success, but, right now I don't think the pieces are there. What do you think about
Well, to be
Tulane?
honest, I have not watched a Tulane football game probably ever in my life.
I don't think I've ever seen them.
I don't know a whole lot about them, except I know that they have hardly ever been successful. Their coach has to do something. 4 years. This is year 4. It's go time. So, best case scenario, they probably win 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, I got them winning 3.
So, that's probably all I got on Tulane, because I've never watched them. I don't follow them or anything. So
not something that
I apologize for the lack of interest or knowledge of that football team, but
it doesn't really
there's no point to following a team that's going to win 2-3 games every year, and it's just a job that comes open every other year, it seems like, and nothing gets done to grab my attention to sit down and watch Tulane football.
They never really have any great recruiting, but the problem is there's no way you can recruit in there. You look at all the teams down there. You've got teams like LSU, who's built up. You've got Louisiana Tech, who's getting in the right direction.
Well, on top of that, they're also in SEC country.
Yeah.
Alabama and Auburn and Texas A&M, they're in there just as much as LSU is. So it's hard to recruit the in-state talent, because LSU or Louisiana is abundant with talent, but it's all SEC talent.
That's true.
You're not going to get a 5-star player going to Tulane. He could go to LSU, Alabama, and compete to win a national championship.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so if anyone's watching this for Tulane, we're pretty sorry. I mean, I think they're going to be 3-9, but again, they're not a team that we've really watched, so we don't really have anything big on them. So from there we move on. Number 4, I have SMU. The biggest storyline really with them is their new coach, Chad Morris. He finally got a head coaching job. It's been a long time. We thought he would definitely have this job before now, but I think it is probably the best one. I have it as the second or third best hire of the entire offseason. He's a great coach. We've seen it. He's made Clemson a great offense. He's had great quarterbacks that have come in there, but he's made other players really good. Like no one expected Deshaun Watson to be as great as he was, and Morris did a great job of making him sensational as a true freshman. Now he has some talent. He has the transfer from Texas A&M, who was expected to be his starting quarterback, in Matt Davis. He was a former highly recruited player. Never really worked out there last year. Had an up and down year, but the guy that actually their biggest returning starter at the position, Garrett Kristich, he had a 2 to 7 touchdown interception ratio, so he won't start. I think Davis is the right guy to start there. There is talent there, especially if he was recruited by A&M. So he fits that style that Morris had at Clemson, so that's a good sign there. Running back, they have a guy in Prescott Line who returns. Again, Davis was actually their leading rusher, so that can't happen again. They got to have someone that steps up at that position. Wide receiver, they do have a good player in Darius Joseph at the wide receiver position, but he only had 379 yards and 2 touchdowns last year. But I think a more balanced passing attack, I think, should help him this year. They have Deion Sanders Jr. He's really a speedster, so they're hoping that he's going to step up in the wide receiver position, but right now he's not even predicted to be a starter. 4 guys return on the offensive line, which is 4 out of the 5 returning starters, so that's something good to build on there. Defense, they return 3 guys up front. One of them's not even predicted to start, in Robert Sales. So both the guys on the inside do return. They'll have to find new pass rushers. Middle linebacker, they have a good guy in Anthony Rione, who had a pretty decent freshman year. He's going to move up and start this year as a sophomore. Jonathan Yenga at the will linebacker position. He's a senior. He'll be pretty good. And then really looking at their secondary, no one that's a superstar. Their best player would probably be Horace Richardson, but he only had 2 interceptions last year. Kicking game, again, a lot of young guys there. So there's definitely a project for Morris to build on there, but like I said, he's got the style of quarterback that he wants. There is talent at SMU. There's always talent at SMU. I mean, they do usually recruit pretty well, but they just can't be like last year. I mean, we thought that Tulane was bad. They averaged 11 points a game. That's just, I mean, that's not even the worst in the nation. I don't know how, but that's just terrible. I mean, all these rankings, offensively and defensively, all inside. The highest they were ranked would be the passing defense at 106. Everything was below that. So there's only one way to go but up. I think they got to give Morris time here. I have them going 6-6 just from looking at their schedule. I think he's going to make them competitive, but for me, that's aiming really high. I'm giving them a great shot this year, but what do you think about that?
I'm real big on the hire. I love Chad Morris at Clemson, except when he played Carolina. He put up 50 points, and I believe in both efforts against us. There's a lot of parallels that goes along with that hire. He is a Texas guy. He's from that area, so he's got established recruiting relationships that will help recruiting talent to come to SMU. 6-6 maybe year one, maybe a reach, but I think they're kind of like some other teams in the conference that kind of like Tulsa. In 2 years, they could be competing to be playing for a conference championship just because of the coach, the style, the up tempo. They should be able to run the ball a little bit and throw the ball, play action pass off the spread and all the runs. So I think they got potential to be good. I'll be pulling for Chad Morris to be successful, and you know, they should be a fun team to watch the next 2, 3, 4 years in the American. So.
Yeah, you're right. I think. I mean, the only reason I have them going 6-6 is looking at their schedule. I think the conference is really that weak. I mean, this is one of the weakest conferences. This is the weakest this conference has been in a long time. Dating back to the Big East. I mean, this is awful looking at this conference. So, you know, if they go 6-6, it'd be probably a shock. But I mean, they don't play anyone, so it's something to aim for. From there, we move to the American Nest. Now we have some teams that are going to be pretty decent, and we have some records that are going to be up there. Navy, I have them finishing third their first year here. They're 9-3, 6-2 in conference is what I have them. We all know what they're going to do. They're just going to run the football and then run the football and then probably run the football. It doesn't matter, though, because they're so good at doing it. I mean, their leading rusher is Keenan Reynolds. He was their leading rusher overall, I believe. He ran for over 1,000 yards, 23 touchdowns as a quarterback, which I don't care what kind of offense you run, that's just nuts.
Right.
The kid's really talented. I know the only games I really watch him have been the Army game, a little bit, you know, when they played like Notre Dame or Ohio State, where they play some of these big teams and there's really nothing else to watch. But watching them, I mean, they're, you know, all they're going to do, you know, he's going to focus on the run. The problem for them, again, is like we saw in the ACC with Georgia Tech, they don't have any starters returning at any of the running back positions. So that's a problem there. They do have a senior in Chris Swain who will be at the fullback position. That's probably their best player right there, besides Reynolds on offense. And then they have some guys that have to step up at the S-back positions, as they call them, in Demon Brown, DeBrandon Sanders, Calvin Cash Jr., and Deshaun Romaine. So they've got to bring in and find people that can work with Reynolds well. Defensively, there's talent here, as always, with guys up front, good returners in Bernard Sara and Will Anthony up front. They do run a 3-4 defense, so they do have 4 linebackers. Only one of those do return, and there is experience behind them, but no one, I think, that's had any great starting experience. The secondary, they do have a good corner in Quincy Adams. Brandon Clements isn't bad either. Kawal Bertrand at safety returns as well, and then they'll have to find some guys behind them. As there is experience, there always is experience with Navy.
Right.
They have one of the biggest rosters, just like any of these service academies. They have a lot of guys that just come out and try. But the thing that I think will make them good is just their coach, Kenny Amatalolo. I think he's one of the more underrated coaches in the country, just because people don't really watch him and know how great he's made that program. I mean, they've been there for a while, and they're usually, I mean, they are competitive with some of these teams. They were competitive with Ohio State for a while last year, and then faded down the stretch. But this year, the only game that is really sizable at a conference is Notre Dame. At Notre Dame, that's it. Other than that, they pretty much play nobody. So, I mean, you know, I think they have the chance to go 9-3. They could win the American West year one. That's how crazy it is. But I don't think they will. I think they'll be a good team. But what do you think about the midshipmen?
They're probably my sleeper to win the whole entire conference, just because when you look at it, none of them teams are going to see that kind of offense on a consistent basis.
Oh, yeah.
We know from our standpoint, it's so difficult whenever you go from trying to stop a spread to you have to scratch your whole entire defensive game plan to stop the triple option.
Yeah.
And they run it as good as anyone in the country. They've got a good quarterback. They've got a good coach. Their defense, their numbers are probably skewed because they're hardly on the field, but you can't argue with what they do defensively. You know, they're always going to be undersized, but I think that they use that to their advantage, a little chip on their shoulder. So I think they could challenge to win the whole entire conference, just because none of those teams are going to have a blueprint on how to stop Navy, because none of them have probably ever played Navy on a consistent year-in, year-out basis.
Yeah.
So 9-3 would be a good year. Navy fans would accept that as, they start a new era and joining a conference, and they'll probably keep on beating Army. So they're
yeah. I don't think Army's ever going to win another football game against them. So let's hope so. But still, yeah. I mean, they're going to be competitive. But I have them finishing now. I have them finishing behind two teams in this conference. We go on to number 2, which would be Houston. That's who I have finishing second. Now, the thing about Houston is they're bringing in a new coaching staff. I mean, they went 8-5 last year, and now apparently that's not enough. Now, I see why there's not, a lot of talent in the American Conference. Tony Levine was a good coach, though, but they let him go. They bring in Tom Herman, which, that may be the best hire of the offseason. Tom Herman is just a sensational coach.
I'm a big fan of his.
And then, besides him, amazingly, they bring in another great guy, Major Applewhite, who used to be at Texas. So they bring in a great coaching staff. I mean, they're better than some of the coaching staffs in major conferences coming in there. But again, it'll take a year. I have them going 9-3, and I still think it'll take a little bit longer for them just to get their game plan in there. Now, they return some talent. At quarterback, they return Greg Ward Jr., who took over the job midway through the year fully. He threw for 2,010 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. That's how you know he took over mid-year, because all they do is pretty much throw the ball. Now it might be a little bit of a different game plan. I would hope it's going to be a little bit of a different game plan. Herman needs to run his offense. They have returning running back in Kenneth Farrow, so that's good. He did have over 1,000 yards last year, which I don't see how these Houston running backs get over 1,000 yards. They somehow always do, though. He had 14 touchdowns on the ground, so he's a superstar to build around. Wide receiver, they only return DeMarcus Ayers is the only one that really returns of significance. Really, really young here, so this is an area where they're definitely going to have to grow up really fast. Defense, they return 6 starters, but the problem is 4 of them are on the back end and 1 at linebacker. They only return 1 guy up front in B.J. Singleton. The rest of the guys are pretty much new. There is some talent there, but they're going to have to, mature quickly because, looking at their schedule, there's not a whole lot of games, but a game against Louisville in which they might think they could pull an upset and try to get on the right track. So looking at it, I think the thing that's going to lead them to the top, again, as we said, American is not extremely talented. Most people have them finishing first in the West. I'm not going that crazy. I know Herman's a good coach, but I have them losing the tiebreaker to Memphis. That's who I have them losing to. Even though it is in Houston, Memphis is going to be talented, but there's a lot to build on there in Houston, and I think they're going to be set for the future. Herman's a great coach. What do you think about the Cougars?
I think he'll elevate the quarterback play. The dude won a national championship with having to use 3 different quarterbacks. And one of those, he did have to beat Alabama. That program, it's got a tradition of being offensively laden. So Tom Herman fits the mold.
Mantra.
So there's talent there. They look kind of young, kind of offensely with the offensive line.
A lot of young kids up front too.
They're young in the trenches, and that'll play a role because as Kirk Herbstreit, that's where you win football games.
Yeah.
So 9 could be a good first year for Herman, because he's never done it, all the responsibilities, so they should be fun to watch. Hopefully they'll be able to run the football a little bit better and balance it out and help the defense.
Running for over 1,000 yards with a running back.
Yeah, so
they're going to be nuts. I think one thing that I didn't really get was Deontay Greenberry, their star wide receiver. He went to the NFL a year early. I think if he would have came back, he would have fit this offense very well. He would have had that Devin Smith type of
deep threat kind of.
But they do have, as I said, Ayers, Chance Allen, the guy that transferred from Oregon. So that might be someone to keep an eye on. And if he can get this offense to work well, he's got a defensive coordinators. He's got 2 guys as well that are pretty talented, and Todd Orlando and Craig Navar. So both of them are talented. This I mean, this team has a lot of talent. They're an underrated team, and they don't play a hard schedule, so they have a definite chance to be really good.
Yeah.
You know, you just wonder about the first-year jitters for Herman. And then I have Memphis winning the American West. I have them going 10-2. That is probably a little high, but they won 10 games last year. You know, we all remember the most memorable thing about their season was them and BYU just absolutely throwing fists at the end of that game. That was crazy. You know, but looking at their roster, I think Paxton Lynch is one of the nation's most underrated quarterbacks. I think this guy is really, really good. Like, he has an NFL-type skill set.
Yeah.
If he can build on what he's done. Touchdown interception ratio was 22-9. Not bad. I can't really argue with 9 picks. That's hard to argue with. He threw for over 3,000 yards, too. So they definitely have something there. The problem really is wide receiver. You know, even with all that, there's still not anyone that's really talented. Their best wide receiver returning only caught 3 touchdowns and for 506 yards last year. Mose Frazier, again, young there. There's no depth at that position. Running back, they do have some young kids that are going to be good, but their leading rusher is Jarvis Cooper returning, who only had 378 yards. Defensively, they only return 3 starters. The only one of any significance is Regis Ball. The rest of them are all young guys. You know, so not any experience really there. But I think the offense is really good enough. And I like their coach, a guy in Justin Fuente, who after the first couple of years was pretty much a dead man out there in Memphis. And when you go 10-3, you can't argue with that. But I think there may be a little bit, I may be putting a little too much on them, but, you know, if they can get, you know, a guy like Paxton Lynch to work well, if they can get a guy that I see here in a junior college transfer, Jalen Oglesby, who used to be a commit to Clemson, to come in there and do well, the offense might be good enough. Now, they need to get someone to step up defensively, but I have them as that kind of Cinderella team that makes it good.
Yeah, the only one to hold them back be the youth defensively.
Yeah, that's the only area.
Offensively, they're going to put up numbers and they're going to score. They've got a good quarterback. But you've got to be able to stop people. And, you know, there's players that probably played, but they don't have the starting reps that may be necessary. Now, granted, they don't play in the toughest conference. So that could help, you know. I don't know if they get Houston at home. If they get Houston at home,
Houston's on the road, but
you know,
Houston's young too.
You
That's how you got to argue these things.
10-2 may be too much of a reach in terms of regular season. You know, 9-3 would be successful.
Yeah,
but this team very well could play their way into a New Year's Eve, New Year's Day kind of bowl. If they manage the expectations the right way, that they can stay healthy, the defense can hold up its end, and Paxton Lynch can take that next step, because I believe he's a junior.
Yeah, he's got this year and next year.
So, you know, the Blues should be singing in Memphis as they play football. So
that's true. I mean, and you look at where their programs come from. I mean, when I saw they were moving into the American, this was a team that was 1-11, 0-12 every year. You're sitting there thinking, well, they're going to be awful. Now they're the team. They might be the team to beat. So you know, they've definitely moved in the right direction. All right, guys. So that was the American Conference. I know this one wasn't as interesting. It's hard to talk about some of these teams because we don't really know a whole lot about these teams. So if anyone is watching this that's a big American fan, I'm sorry. Definitely, I'd love to talk with you guys about these teams. You know, I can talk a little bit about these teams, like you saw with Memphis and Houston and things like that. We can talk about some of these teams. But, you know, overall, the conference is weak. But there could be one of those surprise teams that ends up coming out there. So, you know, it's been fun. These past couple of weeks. Next week will be the Big 12, so it's going to be a lot better next week. Probably a 2-part show because it's going to be a little more in-depth. So we'll probably do half the conference, cut it off, and then do the second half of the conference there. You know, because with that, I also kind of want to talk about the Big 12, maybe if they should try to go to 12 teams and bring back the conference championship. But So if you guys liked it, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Future Tar Heel. You can follow me on Instagram at Anthony_Pagnotta96. And, of course, you can subscribe to the show. And if you want to follow this guy, you can follow him at Future UNC Grad on Twitter and at Josh Marlow 5 on Instagram. Thank you guys so much.